Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Dill. Saturday morning, we are post spring practice. We are post spring transfer portal. This is about as good of time as any to revamp the Big Ten power rankings heading into the 2025 year. Look, I know I'm going to take some heat in the comment section, and rightfully so. There are certainly some takes where I kind of put my flagpole in the mountain in terms of calling my shot. Middle of May, y'all let it fly in the comments section. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, I have a feeling I'm going to be taking some heat from the Ohio State fans in the comments section, having them number 2 behind Oregon. I will give you the T-box first. How are we feeling about those top 3 teams in terms of title contenders going into 2025?
Yeah, and I like it. And honestly, I think Penn State might have the biggest gripe because Penn State, there is so much to love. Like when your offensive
Yeah.
line run game is going to be what it's going to be. I don't have the same questions I feel like some people have about the defense. Like Jim Knowles, year one, I know he struggled at some other places. He was taking over like real dumpster fires though of defenses. Like these are well coached players. I think you still have like Danny Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant. People act like those two guys don't exist. And like, oh, what are they going to do without Abdul Carter? I still think that defense is going to be awesome. My only question is, have you fixed the problem that's been plaguing Penn State? And that's when they play really good teams. You've seen too many moments where their offense hasn't really been able to keep up. Now they were able to do it a little bit against Oregon in that Big Ten championship game,
Yep.
but can they consistently do that? And like, do they have the firepower on the outside,
He-
especially losing Tyler Warren?
Here's I think the best way to defend my top 3. Does Penn State, when all 3 of these teams play their best football in 2025, who's the best team in this conference? Last year in 2024, it was clearly Ohio State. When Ohio State played their best football in 2024, they were by far the best team, not only in this conference, but in this country. Now, you look at it going into 2025, I get having Oregon as the number 1 team in this conference is a little bit of a spicy take because there's a lot of new on this Oregon team, specifically in the secondary. It's a brand new secondary. It's going to be a young secondary, but it's going to be a much more talented secondary than what we saw in the 2024 year. Oregon didn't have the dudes to run with Ohio State in that Rose Bowl. I think they have those guys going into the 2025 year. It's a bunch of 6'1 plus guys that run sub 11 seconds in the 100-meter dash. I think Oregon's best football, if it all comes together in 2025, might be some of the best football you see in the country. And then with Ohio State, it's
The
like
big separator, in my opinion, with Oregon and Ohio State is defensive line play. Like
yeah,
Oregon had, especially
yeah,
in the defensive end group, a elite unit, I think, coming back. Ohio State has to, I mean, their front four played a ton of football for them. They were on the
and they
field
were
pretty much all game.
really
They
good.
were awesome, and you couldn't take them off the field. So I'm not being critical of anyone here because
Yeah.
that front four was one of the better groups we've seen in college football probably in the last 10 years or so. I do wonder, like, are they going to be able to replace that? The spring game, I know, and shout out Ohio State for putting themselves on TV on spring, unlike all these other teams, it feels like. But you did come away, at least if you're me, some questions about what that defensive line can be. And if you don't have a really good defensive line, it's really hard to be a great team, I think.
Dill, that probably is the bit. Like there are a lot of questions to have with Ohio State, like new coordinators, new quarterback. Look, I trust this offense is going to be pretty damn good when you have a guy like Jeremiah Smith on offense. And that offensive line, I know I took some heat. The offensive line is going to be good. Dill, that defensive line. I feel like everybody just wanted to talk about Jeremiah Smith last year when they won that national championship. And look, rightfully so. He's the best wide receiver we've seen in a very long time in this sport. That defensive line was top 5 in the country against the run. It was number 1 in the country in sack percentage. Are we even going to be close to that in the 2025 year is probably the question. And that's not me getting up here and saying Ohio State's defensive line is going to be bad. It's not going to be a bad unit, but is it going to be elite to the point where it's national championship caliber? That's the question. Then I look at Oregon. I mean, Mateo, you and Tatum kind of highlighting the group, but you have so much young talent that is working their way up the pipeline. Dan Lanning wants to replicate what he did at Georgia as the defensive coordinator and just stifle people up front. And he's put a ton of time and resources to acquiring those kind of bodies on the defensive line. And I think going into 2025, if some of those young bodies hit, I think you're looking at one of the best defensive lines in the country. And it's deeper. I think one of the problems with Oregon last year was after, a 13 Big Ten schedule season, you roll into the playoffs and you kind of saw this happen against Penn State in the Big Ten championship game. They just kind of ran out of gas, man. Like they were not a factor against Penn State. They certainly weren't a factor against Ohio State. The better depth is going to help this team play their best football when it comes to January. I think that's the difference between this Oregon team in 2025 versus the team in 2024.
And honestly, that to me is the difference. Because again, I think my national rankings, if I were to do them right now, I had Oregon at 2 or 3, I can't remember, and then
3.
Ohio State at 5. So it's razor tight up there at the top to me. Ohio State again, like if a McDonald plays well or Edric Houston plays really well this year, yeah, they're probably right back 100, especially Edric Houston because he had some really good moments last year. Bo Atkinson was a huge get. I think you definitely wish they got a defensive tackle who could be a bit more of an impact guy in the spring portal at that point. But it is what it is. I mean, Ohio State, again, they have the guys. I just look that defensive line, and then you still got to replace, obviously, a lot on the offense side of the ball, especially as it pertains to how they were able to run it, because they could run it pretty well last year.
Very good point. Not only the running back room, but also Will Howard and his legs as well, along with Chip Kelly knowing how to dial up a run game. That's a very good point too. Look, we'll probably move on from this conversation with this. You look at these 3 teams, I think they're the clear title favorites in this conference. You could put them in any order you wanted. If you wanted to lean into more known commodities, you probably have Penn State as the leader in the clubhouse. If you wanted to lean into ceiling, it's probably Oregon, Ohio State. That's probably my take.
And then honestly, I'd close on this. To me, I'd still keep Penn State at that 3rd spot until I see Drew Allar playing elite and them winning big games, because that just hasn't been a thing. But Drew Allar, he to me is like the real. He needs to play like he's being mocked pretty high in NFL mock drafts. He's not exactly played at that level yet, and I think with their lack of firepower, I think it's good enough, but it's not great, I wouldn't say, in terms of wide receiver play, tight end play. He needs to be really, really good, I think. And we haven't seen him be really, really good yet. Is that going to happen in his senior year and he could kind of leave his stamp on college football?
And look, if you wanted to make the argument, I could make that argument where it's like, all right, he's gotten better every single year he started. Year 2 with Coach Colton, Nikki. I think you have better wide receivers. My bigger issue is replacing a guy like Tyler Warren. There's arguments to make that Drew could be that guy. And look, if Drew is that guy in 2025, this team might be my pick to win a national championship. Second tier, I got a big tier here. And here's where I kind of see this. Michigan, you have one massive question mark, and that is the offensive side of the football, specifically a true freshman quarterback. Dylan, am I crazy to say that Michigan can have the best defense in this conference in 2025?
No, I don't think that's
crazy. I don't like you. And here's what it is. This is not just lip service of, all right, Wink Martindale year 2 on defense. You saw it with your own eyes. Like it wasn't bad early in the season last year, but it wasn't perfect. I think a lot of us Michigan fans felt like there was some meat left on the bone in terms of what this defense could have been early in 2024. Not in the back half. I mean, you look at stifling Ohio State. You look at stifling Alabama in the bowl game without Mason Graham, Kenneth Graham, Will Johnson. This defense maybe doesn't have the top end talent that it had last year. It certainly doesn't, right? With Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. It's a more complete, deeper defense. And I think Wink Martindale is going to get to work with a lot of different stuff he can do. Illinois and Indiana.
Illinois and Indiana, to me, I think you need to put a line between them in that next group of 4 you have in this teams to watch.
Yeah, okay.
Because Illinois and Indiana, I almost feel like you're almost disrespecting what I think those 2 teams are going to be. Illinois is pretty simple. They are just so solid. They know what they want to do. Their secondary, that's probably a top 10, maybe top 5 unit in the country. I mean, they play together well. They can take the ball away. They're really, really good. Their defensive line has some difference makers like Gabe Yakas. Indiana, kind of same thing. Like this is a team I think we're really pretty. And
I don't think so. Can I say
premier Indiana haters? Because I have been an Indiana hater at times. I'm really coming around. They retain pretty much their whole offensive line. I think they lose one starter. They get a big-time quarterback in Mendoza through the portal. And then you look, there's a lot coming back on the defense that you really love. Like they got to replace some guys on the inside of the defensive line. But everywhere else, Aiden Fisher back at linebacker, D'Angelo Pounds back in the secondary, Kamara back at the edge room. They have some real difference makers at each level. And then the wide receiver room is great. So I look at those three teams. Michigan has a big question. I think they have the highest ceiling by a good margin in that group. But
Yep.
Indiana and Illinois are just better teams, I think, than those next four teams
They're
you have.
they're they're teams that they're I'll rephrase that for you. They're teams that you know more about and you're a little bit more confident in going into 2025. The reason I have these other four teams involved in this conversation is if things fall the right way for these four teams, you could sell me on them in the end of October going into November in that like top end of the Big Ten. And I'll give you my 30 set. And then I know you're going to pick you're going to talk about the questions. I know you're going to do that. So I'll address the questions after. Give me my 30-second elevator pitch on each of them. I'll try to keep it shorter than that. USC addressing the defensive line, which was by far the biggest problem you had with this team last year. Year two with Dan Lynn, I think matters. One of the best defensive coordinators in the game. Penn State tried to go get Dan Lynn. USC fought like heck to keep him.
Antlin's good, not arguing.
The question you have with USC, I think if you pulled the USC fan and said, all right, what's the biggest question you have about this football team? I think they're going to say quarter. That's at least my biggest question mark. And Dill, if your biggest question mark about a USC football team is Lincoln Riley's quarterback, I think you're in a decent spot. Now there are things that need to come together. I'm concerned about the offensive line depth. I'm concerned about some depth at some other positions of this football team, but they have some upside. If Jaden puts it together, you have Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane, who I think are one of, if not outside of Ohio State, probably the best wide receiver duo in the country. There are more questions that you have with Illinois. And there are more questions that you have for USC than you have with a team like Illinois and Indiana. But I think there's some upside that I think people don't appreciate. And I think people don't appreciate, especially you, like this USC team was not as bad as their record showed last year. Had some really nice
No,
wins.
don't do the one score game to me because you don't want to be. You shouldn't be in one score games consistently with not good teams, and that's not a great defense to me of the record because you should be wiping the floor with Maryland. Maryland's not a particularly good team.
Yeah, I agree.
In games with Rutgers. Rutgers is not a great team.
They blew Rutgers out. No, they won. They beat Rutgers badly last year. And I think the problem with this football team was when it got into the fourth quarter, specifically in a conference like the Big Ten, they weren't playing their best football because they had a bunch of small and just not good enough defensive linemen that had to play 60 snaps a game. The depth on the defensive line is going to help this team late in games this year. Look, I get the question marks. I certainly do. But I think this team has addressed some of those question marks, and I think they have some upside to believe in. I'm sorry, I was a little bit longer than a 30-second elevator pitch on USC. Nebraska. I think it's pretty simple here. This offense has a chance to be really good, right? If this offensive line can come together, which I think is the deepest offensive line that Matt Rule has had since he's been at Nebraska.
Well, Pritchett's got to hit. That's because everything else, I think you're pretty comfortable with this offensive line. Pritchett has had really good moments at Alabama and some really bad moments. Yeah. If they just get a good steady year from him, offensive line's fine, and that offense, you're right, is off to the races.
Dana Holgerson's a massive storyline for Nebraska. I think he's such a big upgrade from Coach Satterfield. I don't think Coach Satterfield's all that great. I think Dana's really good. The question you have is the defensive line is, I think, really scary going into 2025. Like, are you even close to good enough with that unit? And if you are, I don't think any Nebraska fan is going to come out and argue that this defensive line is going to be elite. But if you can hit on a guy like Williams-Nwaneri coming in, if you can find some guys in the middle of the defensive line that can hold up, this team should be pretty dang good.
Because the rest of the defense is good, especially at the linebacker spot. But that you can't play good football if your defensive line's not. Especially
the thing is like, yeah, that's the concern. Is it going to be a liability where teams can just kind of move you around? Iowa. Look, we know what they're going to be on defense. I think they low-key kind of quietly took a step last year on offense with some new coaching. And now I think they have probably I'll say this, they have a winner at the quarterback position coming from the FCS ranks, but they also have a guy that can be a difference maker. You know, we loved Cade McNamara coming to Iowa because on paper it's like, oh, just get a quarterback that can go and run the offense. He's just not a difference maker. I mean, cannot extend plays, cannot really make
You
high
just
level
got
throws
the same
consistently.
old you got the same old Iowa, and they didn't
Yeah,
have enough talent around them as they never really do. You need a difference maker at quarterback, and you're right, they do kind of have it.
this kid coming, he can be a difference maker. He can elevate this offense, and if he does, look, would you be surprised if we're talking about Iowa in the top of the Big Ten? And then here's Washington. I think this one's probably the hottest take that I have. The more I do my work on Washington, the more I'm starting to believe. I'll keep it at 30 seconds here. Damon Williams has the chance to be one of the best quarterbacks in this conference. He is a difference maker in terms of an athlete, has a big time arm. He's a little bit smaller. He's about as fun of a quarterback to watch in this conference. You have some people around him. Denzel Boston is an NFL wide receiver. Jonah Coleman is one of the most
Right.
underrated running backs in the country. Ryan Walters coming in on the defensive side of the football as your coordinator. Probably one of the best cornerback duos that you see in this conference.
Back seven of the defense, actually, like I like Alukta from Washington State. Really,
The,
really, that's one of my guys coming out of the portal. I thought he can play. So I like their safety or secondary room. I like their linebacker room. Defensive line, Durfee, I like him. I'm not sure they
it's
have much else besides
the,
him,
the
but it's gonna be
That's
weird
the
stuff.
question. That's the question. I think on both sides of the line of scrimmage. Like, are we good enough in the Big Ten? Like, I kind of like this team around the line of scrimmage play is the line. And we all know that you want to be an elite team in the Big Ten, you got to have the necessary line of scrimmage play. But
All right. So now that you hit me with these elevator pitches, I don't see how you don't think there should be another tier because I just don't think those four teams we just talked about, like in terms of just pure completeness and in like if you're gonna put a probability on like where they're gonna be, they're just not particularly close right now to me to
I
Indiana,
think they're much.
Illinois.
I think they're much closer, and I think the reason I want to keep them here is because if things work out for these four teams, I think the upside is pretty dang high.
The
Like my
keyword
question
is
with
like I like things don't necessarily need to work out for like Indiana and Illinois, frankly, to be really good. Like they're just gonna be good, I think. And again, they certainly could have a really down year. I'm not saying that's impossible. I'm saying it's really unlikely. I think those two teams, especially,
yeah,
you're really comfortable with. Michigan's got a wicked high ceiling to me, so that's why they should probably be in that tier. Because you're right, that defense is great, and Bryce Underwood's unique talent. Those other four teams to me, I just look so many things need to hit in like the probability I just think is quite a bit lower. Like again, their
well,
ceilings are right up there with those other teams. I just think their probability of reaching it is like again, things really need to come together that haven't quite come together yet.
yeah, and maybe it's just I had four tiers to work with, and maybe I could have created a fifth one. I just didn't want to put these teams with the next tier because I
They,
think there's a
they definitely
yeah,
don't belong with those next teams. That's for sure.
yeah.
Those next teams don't have a chance of competing in the Big Ten
Well,
in my
that's
opinion.
and look, you don't make a lot of money down PJ Fleck. I just look at and here's what it is. Like I like Wisconsin's roster better than Minnesota. But I just trust PJ Fleck more than Luke Fickle right now. I don't think Luke Fickle has a real good sense of how we're going to win football games. Like, what kind of team do we want to beat teams every Saturday? I don't think they've kind of lost their identity. They're in between this. Like Luke Fickle's going to come in and revolutionize this program, but you still have like the roster that Paul Chris built, and they've just been like teetering into like I don't know what we want to do. What is our I'm trying to think of the best word.
Well,
What's
like,
our
what's
what's our
the goal you
identity?
want to win? And they don't
Yeah,
have it because their lines of scrimmage have been pretty weak under Fickle, which I think's been highly disappointing. And
yep,
then that issue they had with Phil Longo was a huge one to me. That felt like a real panic move to Luke Fickle. Like Luke Fickle just
yes,
needed someone to blame for his
yep,
failings as head coach there.
yeah,
That's a really questionable one. So I just don't love where Wisconsin's at. They need to make some real changes. Minnesota, I think, might have a bit of a down year because they lost a lot of guys, especially on
yeah.
the offensive side of the ball.
Well,
I think they'll play solid defense. Their offensive line, big questions about, but I think Luke or PJ Fleck in Minnesota, it's not a program question to me. I think they'll
yeah.
reload it and get themselves back, but I don't look at their roster this year as being particularly competitive.
Well, I think you got to rephrase that as like competitive at the top end of the Big Ten. Like, do they have a
Oh
roster
yeah,
that's
yeah,
being
no, no, like where they were. I mean, they were like punching up
yeah,
against teams, like playing really good. They'd have those years where they go and play at Penn State really tough
but they
and be really
never,
played really
yeah.
tough last year. It'll be hard for them to
UCLA,
break through. sure, because they're not premier recruiters, but like they're always kind of in the mix.
UCLA, super fun. Nico at quarterback. The
Yeah,
question here is that it's a new. I hate starting quarterbacks coming post spring like that. That just it really doesn't work out all that often. And then I don't think it's a situation where you can just plug and play him and he's gonna have the pieces around him. And I will say this about UCLA: we probably panicked on them a little bit too much last year. Like they had a very brutal schedule in September, including a game against Indiana, I believe week 2, where it's like we didn't know how good Indiana was going to be, and so they lost by a lot to Indiana, and we kind of
we
just said,
also
well,
UCLA
UCLA,
sucks. Not Indiana's
yeah,
really.
and when they got a little bit more of a gettable schedule, they started stringing together wins. Rutgers and Michigan State, I don't have a ton of confidence in, but I don't want to put them in the tier with Maryland, Purdue, and Notre Dame. I think Michigan State's a fun one. Like, what does Childs look like year 2 as a starter at Michigan State with a top 5 receiver in this conference in Nick Marsh? Ain't nobody talking about Nick Marsh. Nick Marsh can absolutely play. Big time question mark. This is not a complete roster, though. You got some question marks at a lot of different position groups. And then Maryland, Purdue, Northwestern, I highlight Purdue. Like, it's just a brand new football team. Eerily
Can
seems,
they Indiana's?
can they be Indiana? But I just don't like. I ain't gonna bet on Purdue being Indiana, and so that's kind of where I sit. And dude, I'll say this: Mike Loxley, hot seat at Maryland, man. Like I don't think that team's trending in the right direction. I think there was a lot of optimism that moving out of like divisions with the Big Ten, because I mean, I think Coach Locks has had some good football teams, and I think if you put Maryland in the Big Ten West, they might have been in a few Big Ten championship games. But when you have to play Michigan, Penn State, and Ohio State every single year, it just kind of capped what Maryland could do. But now I think they're trending in the wrong direction. I think it's very stale with Coach Loxley at Maryland. We'll pause there. Let it fly. Please let it fly in the comment section. This is the beauty of doing these in May. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later.